Perfect. That was the only word I said when my daughter-in-law, Rachel, announced that 25 members of her family would be descending upon my house for Christmas. She had planned everything: the menu, the seating chart, the schedule, the Instagram aesthetic, and forgotten one small detail: asking me. Her face went white when I continued. I'll be going on vacation. You can all handle the cooking and the cleaning. I am not the maid. But what she didn't know, what nobody in that house knew, was that the real surprise hadn't even started yet. My name is Joanna Langford. I am 66 years old. I am a retired high school English teacher. I am a widow, and for the last 5 years I have been treated like a servant in my own home by the woman my son married. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled. And please, stay with me until the end, because this story does not go where you think it does. I need to take you back to the beginning, because what happened that Tuesday in December didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of 5 years of silence, 5 years of swallowed pride, 5 years of choosing peace over truth and paying for it with pieces of my soul. My husband, Richard Langford, passed away 8 years ago. Prostate cancer. He fought it for 14 months, and I fought it right beside him. Every appointment, every treatment, every terrible night when the pain medication wasn't enough, and all I could do was hold his hand and whisper that it was okay to let go. When he finally did, on a Sunday morning in April, the silence in this house was so complete, I thought I might drown in it. Richard left me this house, 4217 Coral Ridge Drive. We bought it in 1994 for $112,000. We paid off the mortgage in 2011. Every tile, every cabinet, every inch of the garden was chosen together. It is not just a house. It is 30 years of a life built with hands that loved each other. After Richard died, my son Dominic was all I had left. He was 24 then, just starting his career in finance, still figuring out how to be a man in a world without his father. I clung to him. I can admit that now. Not physically, not in any way that would smother him, but emotionally, he was my anchor, the last living proof that Richard and I had built something good. 3 years after Richard's death, Dominic met Rachel Whitmore at a colleague's wedding. She was 24, beautiful in that polished, deliberate way, the kind of beauty that requires 2 hours of preparation and a very expensive hair straightener. She had a smile that could light up a room and eyes that missed nothing. I liked her at first. I truly did. She was charming, attentive, and she made my son laugh in a way I hadn't heard since his father's funeral. They married 14 months later, a small ceremony at a vineyard outside of town. Rachel wore a designer gown that cost more than my first car. I wore a blue dress I'd bought at Macy's, and a smile I meant with my whole heart. I was happy for them. I wanted to be happy for them. And then, slowly, everything changed. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about being slowly erased from your own life. You don't notice it happening until you're already gone. The first time was small. So small I almost didn't register it. It was Dominic's birthday, the first one after the wedding. Rachel announced she was throwing him a party, 15 of their friends, dinner at the house. My house. She said it casually, as if it were already decided, and then added, almost as an afterthought, "Joanna, could you handle the food? You're such a wonderful cook." I was flattered. That's the truth of it, and I'm not too proud to admit it. After 2 years of eating dinner alone and talking to Richard's photograph on the mantel, someone wanted my cooking. Someone needed me. So I spent 2 days in the kitchen. Lasagna from scratch, Caesar salad with homemade dressing, a 3-layer chocolate cake with ganache that took 4 hours to get right. The night of the party, I was arranging the dessert plates when I heard one of Rachel's friends say, "Rachel, this food is incredible. You did all this?" And Rachel, my daughter-in-law, standing 6 feet from the kitchen where I was still wearing my apron with flour on my hands, said, "Thank you. I spent all day in the kitchen." She laughed. Her friend laughed. I stood there holding a cake server, waiting for the correction that never came. I told myself she was just being polite, just accepting a compliment awkwardly. It didn't mean anything. People misspeak. People forget. It was nothing. It was everything. By the second year, the pattern was set in concrete. Every time Rachel and Dominic entertained, which was often because Rachel loved an audience, I was the one who planned, shopped, cooked, served, and cleaned. Rachel was the one who posted photographs on Instagram. Rachel was the one who accepted compliments at the door. Rachel was the one who sat at the head of the table while I carried plates back and forth from the kitchen like a ghost with an apron. Thanksgiving, year 3. Rachel invited 10 of her work colleagues to what she called an intimate gathering. I prepared a 14-pound turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce from fresh cranberries, green bean casserole, homemade rolls, and 2 pumpkin pies. It took me 3 days of preparation. Rachel photographed the table before anyone sat down. I saw the Instagram post later that night while I was washing the last of the roasting pans, alone, at 11:15. The caption read, "Hosting is my love language." 47 likes. 3 heart emojis from her sister Patty. A comment from her cousin Evelyn. "You're literally Martha Stewart." I scrubbed the turkey pan until my wrists ached and told myself this was how I stayed close to my son. But the moment that truly woke me up, the moment the fog finally lifted, happened on a Tuesday afternoon, 8 months before this Christmas. A perfectly ordinary Tuesday that split my life into before and after. I had just come back from a doctor's appointment. My lower back had been aching for weeks, the kind of deep, grinding pain that comes from 30 years of standing in front of classrooms and 5 years of standing over kitchen sinks that aren't grateful. The doctor said it was a herniated disc. He recommended physical therapy, rest, and, his exact words, "Stop doing whatever is causing you to stand for hours at a time." I was sitting in my kitchen with an ice pack on my back when Rachel called. Not to ask how I was doing. Not to ask about the appointment she knew I'd had. She called to inform me that she was having a few friends over that evening, and could I throw something together. Nothing fancy, maybe that lemon chicken thing you do. For about 8 people? 8 people. Nothing fancy. My back was on fire and my daughter-in-law was placing a catering order. I said yes. I know. But you have to understand, I was not some helpless woman who didn't know she was being used. I was a woman who was terrified of being alone. After Richard died, Dominic was all I had, and I had watched, with the careful eyes of a teacher who has spent 40 years reading faces, how Rachel controlled access to my son. When she was happy with me, I got dinner invitations and phone calls. When she was not, Dominic would go silent for weeks, always with an excuse. Busy at work, not feeling well, meant to call. Rachel held the keys to my son, and I danced whenever she jangled them. So that Tuesday, I cooked. I made the lemon chicken and a Greek salad and garlic bread. I set the table for 8 with my good dishes. And at 7:30, when Dominic came home from work and walked into the kitchen where I was plating the food, he put his arm around Rachel and said, "Babe, you're amazing. How do you manage to do it all?" Rachel leaned into him and smiled. "I just love taking care of people." I was standing 4 feet away, holding a serving spoon, invisible. That night, after everyone left and I was alone with the dirty dishes, I didn't cry. I was past crying. I stood at the sink and looked at my reflection in the dark window, a 65-year-old woman with dishwater hands and an aching back, and I asked her a question I should have asked 5 years earlier. "Who are you?" Because the woman in that window was not the Joanna Langford who had taught Shakespeare to teenagers for 4 decades. Not the woman who had negotiated a mortgage at 29, raised a son on a teacher's salary, held her husband's hand through cancer, and rebuilt a life from grief. That woman had opinions and boundaries, and a voice that could silence a classroom of 30 sophomores with a single look. The woman in the window was a ghost. And ghosts don't get to complain about being invisible. I need to be honest about something, because this story only works if I tell you the truth. All of it, including the parts that embarrass me. I was not an innocent victim. I chose this. Every single time I said yes when I meant no, every time I scrubbed a pan instead of speaking up, every time I pretended not to hear Rachel take credit for my work. That was my choice. I chose silence because I was afraid. Afraid that if I drew a line, Rachel would punish me by taking away my son. And I believed, God help me, I believed, that being a servant in my son's life was better than being nothing in it. My friend Linda Torres, 64, retired history teacher, the kind of woman who says exactly what she thinks and has never once apologized for it, had been telling me for years that I was being used. She'd sit across from me at our Thursday morning coffee and say, "Joanna, honey, you are a doormat with a KitchenAid mixer. When are you going to stand up?" And I would smile and change the subject. Because standing up meant risking everything. But that Tuesday night, after the lemon chicken and the invisible serving spoon, something shifted. It was small, just a crack, just a hairline fracture in the wall I had built around my real self. But it was enough. The next morning I went to the bookstore and bought a book Linda had recommended months earlier. A book about boundaries, about the difference between generosity and self-abandonment, about the quiet violence of letting people treat you as less than you are. I read it in 2 days, and when I finished, I sat in my garden. Richard's garden, really. The roses he planted the year Dominic was born. And I made a decision. I was done being invisible. I just didn't know yet how thoroughly I would need to mean it. Which brings me to that Tuesday in December, 7 months after the lemon chicken and the book about boundaries. The Tuesday that started everything. I was sitting at the kitchen table reading. It happened to be a novel about a woman who reinvents her life at 60, because apparently even my leisure reading was trying to tell me something, when I heard the front door open without a knock. Rachel. She always entered my house without knocking, as if it were already hers. I heard her heels first. Click, click, click on my ceramic tile, a sound I had come to associate with incoming demands. She was wearing a red dress that I estimated cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $400, paid for, I was fairly certain, with money my son didn't know she was spending. But I'm getting ahead of myself. "Joanna," she said, sweeping into the kitchen with that particular smile she reserved for me, the one that looked warm from a distance, but up close was as calculated as a chess opening. "I have marvelous news." She sat down in my kitchen chair, not asking, never asking, crossed her legs, and delivered her announcement the way a queen delivers a decree. "My entire family is coming to spend Christmas here. It's only 25 people. Only 25 people? She began listing them as if reading a grocery order. "My sister Patty is flying in from New York. My brother-in-law Douglas is coming. He's been dying to see the house. Uncle Gerald is coming all the way from Miami with Aunt Vivian. My cousin Evelyn and her husband, their 3 kids. My cousin Bradley and his wife. My second cousin's from Virginia." She went on and on. 25 names. 25 mouths to feed. 25 sets of expectations, all resting on the shoulders of one 66-year-old woman who hadn't been consulted. "Of course," Rachel continued, her voice dropping into that particular register she used when she was about to assign me my duties. "You'll handle everything. The food, the cleaning, serving the tables." She paused, her eyes glinting with something I can only describe as ownership. "We'll need at least 3 turkeys. And that chocolate silk pie you make. Uncle Gerald has a serious sweet tooth. Oh, and you'll have to decorate the entire house. I want it to look perfect for the photos." She waited for my usual response. The "yes, Rachel," that had become as automatic as breathing, as reflexive as flinching. But I had spent 7 months reading about boundaries and rebuilding the woman in the dark window, and something inside me, something that had been bending for 5 years, finally, quietly, cleanly, snapped. I looked her directly in the eye. I set down my book, and with a calm that surprised even me, I said, "Perfect." I watched her smile flicker, just a millimeter, just a shadow of uncertainty crossing that carefully maintained face. "It will be a perfect Christmas for all of you," I continued, "because I won't be here." The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had heard in 5 years. Rachel blinked, once, twice, 3 times, as if her brain were a computer encountering an error it had never been programmed to handle. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. The clicking of her heels had stopped. The queen had been told for the first time that her subject had abdicated. "What do you mean you won't be here?" she finally managed. Her voice had a tremor in it that I had never heard before. The tremor of a person who has just felt the ground shift beneath a foundation they assumed was permanent. "Exactly what you heard. I'm going on vacation. You can cook, clean, and serve yourselves. I am not your employee." I watched the color leave her face like water draining from a bathtub. Her hands, perfectly manicured, began to shake. The coffee cup she was holding clinked against its saucer, a tiny musical sound that I will remember for the rest of my life, because it was the sound of power shifting. But Joanna," she stammered, "I already told everyone to come. It's all planned. You can't do this." "Of course I can. It's my house." Those 4 words landed in the kitchen like a grenade with the pin already pulled. It's my house. 4 syllables that contained 30 years of mortgage payments, 30 years of maintenance, 30 years of a life Rachel had decided was simply a stage set for her own performance. Rachel shot up from the chair, her heels clicking again but faster now, frantic. The rhythm of someone whose script has just been rewritten without her permission. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "Dominic is not going to allow this." "Dominic can have whatever opinion he likes," I replied. "But the decision has been made." She stared at me, and for the first time in 5 years, I stared back without looking away. Dominic came home at 6:30 that evening to a house at war. I heard Rachel intercept him at the front door, her voice sharp and breathless, a child running to tattle. Dominic, your mother has lost her mind. She says she's going on vacation and leaving us alone with my entire family. She refuses to help with Christmas. She's being completely irrational." Their muffled voices moved from the foyer to the living room. I stayed in the kitchen, washing my coffee cup with the slow deliberation of someone who has nowhere to be and nothing to prove. After a few minutes, their footsteps approached. Dominic appeared in the doorway. His suit wrinkled after a long day at the office, his tie loosened, his face carrying that particular expression of a man who has been told by his wife that his mother is the problem and has not yet considered the possibility that his wife might be wrong. Behind him, Rachel hovered like a shadow with crossed arms and a triumphant expression. She had summoned her enforcer. She was expecting results. "Mom," Dominic began, using the patronizing tone he had adopted somewhere around year 2 of his marriage, a tone I suspected he had learned from Rachel the way children learn accents from their environment. "Rachel told me about your decision. Don't you think you're being a little dramatic?" Dramatic. My own son was calling me dramatic for declining to be his wife's unpaid caterer. And there it was, that flash in his eyes. Brief, almost invisible, but I caught it because I am a woman who spent 4 decades reading the faces of teenagers trying to hide the fact that they hadn't done the reading. He knew. In that fraction of a second, my son knew I was right. He knew his wife had been using me. He knew and he chose, as he had chosen every time for 5 years, to look away. Because looking away was easier, because the alternative, confronting Rachel, risking her displeasure, disrupting the comfortable arrangement where someone else handled everything, was harder than letting his mother scrub pans at midnight. That flash of knowing, and the immediate decision to ignore it, hurt more than 5 years of dirty dishes. "No, Dominic," I said quietly. "I am not being dramatic. I am being clear." "But Mom, it's Christmas. It's a time for family. Rachel already invited everyone. We can't cancel now." "I didn't say cancel. I said I won't be here." Rachel stepped forward, placing herself between Dominic and me, a physical barrier, a human wall. "See what I mean?" she said to Dominic. "Completely irrational. What will my family think? What am I going to tell them?" "Tell them the truth," I answered. "That you assumed I would be your employee without asking me, and that you were mistaken." Dominic ran a hand through his hair, a gesture inherited directly from his father, who used to do the same thing when he was trying to solve a problem he didn't want to face. "Mom, be reasonable. You know Rachel can't cook for 25 people by herself. And why not? I've cooked for her parties for 5 years. It's time she learned." "But I work," Rachel protested. "I can't take days off to cook. My career is important." Her career. A part-time position at a boutique downtown, 3 days a week. But I bit my tongue on that because I still had cards I wasn't ready to play. "Then hire a caterer," I suggested, letting a small smile cross my face. "There are many excellent options in the city." "Catering costs a fortune," Dominic exclaimed. "Why spend thousands of dollars when you can?" He stopped. The sentence hung in the air, half-spoken but fully understood. "When I can do it for free," I finished for him. "Like always. Like the unpaid employee you think I am." The silence stretched between the 3 of us like a crack widening across ice. I watched my son's face as the words settled in, not just heard, but understood, perhaps for the first time in all their ugliness. It was Rachel who broke the silence, because Rachel always needed to control the narrative. Her voice shifted, dropping the outrage, putting on the sweetness like a coat she kept in the closet for emergencies. "Joanna," she said, her eyes softening into a performance of warmth that might have worked on me a year ago. "You know I've always thought of you as a second mother. You're so important to me, to us. You can't just abandon us like this." "If you truly considered me a mother," I replied, "you wouldn't treat me like a servant." But I don't treat you like a— You do, and we both know it. The only question is whether my son knows it too. I looked at Dominic. He looked at the floor. And then Rachel made her mistake. Her composure cracked just for a moment, and the real Rachel surfaced like something breaking through ice. You know what, Joanna? This house, Dominic is your son. This house will be ours one day. You should remember that. There it was, spoken aloud finally, the truth that had been hovering in the air for 5 years like smoke from a fire nobody wanted to acknowledge. Rachel didn't see me as family. She saw me as a temporary obstacle standing between her and everything I had spent a lifetime building. Interesting perspective, I murmured, watching her pupils dilate as she realized what she had just revealed. Very interesting. Dominic looked up sharply. Rachel, she didn't mean— Oh, I think she meant exactly that, I said softly. Rachel's mouth opened and closed. For once, she had no script prepared. Then Dominic let something else slip, something that added another crack to the fracturing picture. Look, Mom, we've got a lot going on right now. We just put a deposit on a new apartment downtown. 3 bedrooms, ocean view. It's a big step for us. A new apartment. This was the first I was hearing about it. My eyes narrowed. Since when were you planning to move? Dominic and Rachel exchanged a guilty glance, the kind of look you share when you've just revealed something that was supposed to stay hidden until after the holidays. We were going to tell you after Christmas, Dominic said, studying his shoes. Sounds expensive, I observed. Rachel's face suddenly brightened, as if she'd found the solution to everything. That's exactly why this Christmas has to be perfect. Uncle Gerald is very generous when he's impressed. And Douglas has connections in real estate. If everything goes well, they could help us with Dominic's career. There it was, the real reason for the grand celebration. It wasn't about family or tradition. It was about money, about impressing wealthy relatives to get financial favors. And I was the cornerstone of their scheme. My decision stands, I said, gathering my book from the table. I leave tomorrow morning. I'll be visiting a friend in Miami and will return after New Year's. A lie, smooth and necessary. They could not know my real plans. Not yet. Tomorrow? Rachel's voice cracked. That's impossible. My family arrives in 3 days. Uncle Gerald already bought his plane ticket. Patty rescheduled her entire December. Douglas took time off work. Those are their problems, I said, heading toward the stairs. Not mine. I paused at the kitchen doorway and turned back one last time. My son was standing in the middle of the room, caught between 2 women, wearing the face of a man who was beginning to suspect that the comfortable life he'd built was constructed on someone else's suffering. Dominic, I said gently, you are 32 years old. You are a fully functional adult. I am certain you can figure this out. I walked up the stairs to my bedroom, closed the door, and locked it. From below, I could hear them arguing, Rachel's voice sharp and escalating, Dominic's low and uncertain. The sounds of a house whose foundation had just developed its first visible crack. I sat on my bed and opened my laptop. It was time for the second phase. Because what they didn't know, what nobody knew except Linda and my lawyer, Robert Caldwell, was that this decision was not spontaneous. It was not a tantrum. It was not hormonal or dramatic or irrational or any of the other words people use to dismiss a woman my age when she finally says no. I had been planning this for exactly 3 months, ever since I found those documents in Dominic's home office, ever since I discovered what Rachel had really been doing behind all of our backs. And what I found, what I'm about to tell you, changed everything. 3 months before that Tuesday in December, back in September, on an unremarkable Wednesday afternoon, I made a discovery that rewired everything I thought I understood about my daughter-in-law. I was cleaning Dominic's home office. Of course I was. Because even though Dominic and Rachel had their own apartment 20 minutes away, they kept a workspace in my house, the guest bedroom on the 2nd floor that Richard used to use as his reading room. Rachel had suggested it 2 years earlier. It would be so convenient for Dominic to have a place to work when we visit. What she meant was, it would be convenient to have a reason to be in your house whenever we want, using your electricity, your internet, your coffee, and your mother-in-law. I was dusting the bookshelves, because apparently a 65-year-old woman with a herniated disc should also be maintaining office space for adults who have their own apartment, when I knocked a stack of papers off the desk. They scattered across the floor, and as I knelt to gather them, a manila folder slid open. Bank statements, printed emails, legal documents. At first glance, I assumed they were Dominic's work files, but then I saw Rachel's name. Not once, not twice. On every single page. I should have put the folder back. That's what the old Joanna would have done. The Joanna who didn't ask questions, who didn't look too closely, who preferred the comfort of ignorance to the pain of knowing. But the old Joanna had died somewhere between the lemon chicken and the book about boundaries. The new Joanna sat down at that desk and read every single page. What I found made my blood run cold. The first thing I discovered was the credit cards. 4 of them, all opened in Dominic's name, using his social security number, his credit history, his identity, without his knowledge. The statements showed a pattern of spending that was breathtaking in its recklessness. Designer handbags at Nordstrom, $1,800. Shoes from Saks Fifth Avenue, $740. A Cartier bracelet, $4,200. Clothes from boutiques I had never heard of, with price tags that would have paid my mortgage for months. The total across all 4 cards, $53,817. $53,000 of debt that my son did not know existed, attached to his name, his credit score, his future. The second discovery was the emails. Rachel had a separate email account, not the one Dominic knew about, but another one, used exclusively for conversations she didn't want him to see. Several threads had been printed out, possibly by accident, possibly because Rachel had needed hard copies for some purpose I couldn't yet understand. In one thread, Rachel wrote to a friend named Amber. Dom is so easy to manage. I just keep him busy with work stuff, and he never checks the statements. As long as dinner is on the table when he gets home, well, Joanna handles that anyway, LOL. He doesn't ask questions. In another, to the same friend, his mother is the perfect cover. She does everything and I get the credit. Dom thinks I'm this amazing homemaker and his mom is just helping out. It's actually hilarious. Hilarious. 5 years of my labor, my aching back, my invisible servitude, hilarious. But the email that stopped my heart was the last one in the folder. It was from Rachel to her brother-in-law, Douglas Whitmore, who worked in real estate. The subject line read, "Quick question about property values." The message read, "Hey Doug, random question. What do you think Joanna's house is worth in the current market? It's on Coral Ridge Drive, about 2,400 square feet, updated kitchen, big lot. Dom and I have been talking about convincing her to sell and downsize to something smaller so we can invest the equity. She's getting older and doesn't really need all that space. Could you do a quick valuation when you're in town? Don't mention it to anyone. We haven't brought it up to her yet. Thanks. XO Rachel, my house. The house Richard and I bought in 1994. The house where I raised my son, buried my husband's memory in every room, paid off every cent of the mortgage with money I earned standing in front of classrooms for 4 decades. Rachel wanted to sell it. She wanted to take the equity, my life's work, and use it to cover whatever financial disaster she had created. I sat in that office for a very long time. The afternoon light moved across the desk, and I didn't move with it. I held those papers, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 5 years. Not sadness, not resignation, not the dull acceptance of a woman who has forgotten her own worth. I felt fury, clean, cold, clarifying fury. That night I did not sleep. At 2 a.m, I called Linda. She answered on the second ring, because Linda Torres is the kind of friend who keeps her phone on the nightstand and never asks why you're calling at 2 a.m. She just says, "I'm here." "I found something," I said. My hands were shaking so badly I had to put the phone on speaker and set it on the kitchen table. "About Rachel." "Tell me." I told her everything. The credit cards, the emails, the plan to sell my house. When I finished, there was a long pause. I could hear Linda breathing, steady, deliberate, the breathing of a woman who is choosing her next words very carefully. "Joanna," she said, "listen to me. You have spent 5 years being afraid of losing your son, but right now, you need to be afraid of losing yourself, your house, your savings, your future. This woman is not just using you. She is dismantling your life piece by piece, and she is doing it with a smile." "I know," I whispered. "So what are you going to do about it?" I didn't answer immediately, because the truth was I didn't yet know. The old Joanna would have confronted Dominic directly, shown him the papers, and trusted him to handle it. But the old Joanna also would have been gambling everything on a son who had spent 5 years choosing his wife's comfort over his mother's dignity. "I need to think," I said. "Then think," Linda replied. "But while you're thinking, remember this. You are not a woman who lets things happen to her. You are a woman who decides. You've just forgotten that for a little while." I spent the next week doing something I hadn't done in years. I walked. Every morning I drove to the beach, the same stretch of coastline where Richard and I used to walk on Sunday mornings, and I walked for hours. I didn't listen to music or podcasts. I just walked and thought and let the sound of the waves reorganize my mind. By the end of that week, I had cried every tear I had in me. And on the 8th morning, I sat on a bench overlooking the ocean, watched the sun come up, and made 3 decisions. First, I would protect my assets, immediately, completely, and legally. Second, I would gather evidence, not reactively, not emotionally, but systematically, the way I used to grade research papers, looking for every source, every citation, every discrepancy. Third, I would not confront Rachel directly. Not yet, because a direct confrontation would give her time to spin a story, to manipulate Dominic, to destroy evidence. Instead, I would wait for the perfect moment, a moment when the truth would be undeniable, when there would be witnesses, and when Rachel's own family would see exactly who she really was. I did not yet know that the perfect moment would arrive gift-wrapped in the form of a Christmas party for 25 people. But life, I have learned, has a sense of timing that borders on poetry. The next Monday, I called Robert Caldwell. Robert was 68, semi-retired, and had been Richard's college roommate at the University of Florida. He had handled our estate planning for 20 years and had cried at Richard's funeral, one of only 3 men I saw cry that day. I trusted him the way I trusted gravity. "Robert, I need your help. It's urgent and it's private." "How private?" "Dominic cannot know." There was a pause. Robert understood family. He understood loyalty. And he understood that when a woman like me says her own son cannot know something, the situation is serious. "Come to my office tomorrow at 9, he said. "Bring everything you have." I brought the folder. Robert read every page in silence, his reading glasses perched on his nose, his expression growing darker with each document. When he finished, he took off his glasses, set them on the desk, and said 2 words. "Identity theft." "What?" "What Rachel did, opening credit cards using Dominic's social security number without his knowledge or consent, that could constitute identity theft. It is a federal crime, Joanna. Your daughter-in-law hasn't just been reckless. She may have committed fraud." The word hung in the air between us. Fraud. It was so much worse than I had imagined. Or maybe I had known and simply hadn't been willing to name it. "What do I do?" I asked. "First, we protect the house." Over the next 6 weeks, Robert and I executed a plan with the quiet precision of 2 people who understood that patience was not weakness. It was strategy. In the first week, I opened a new savings account at a different bank, First Atlantic across town, an institution where neither Dominic nor Rachel had ever set foot. I transferred my entire savings, $147,000, the accumulation of 40 years of teaching and careful living, into this account. I changed the mailing address to Linda's house so no statements would ever arrive at Coral Ridge Drive. In the second week, Robert restructured the deed to my house into a family trust, the Langford Family Preservation Trust. The legal language was precise. The house could not be sold, mortgaged, or used as collateral without my explicit written consent. In the event of my death, ownership would transfer to Dominic, but with the same restrictions. No spouse, no in-law, no one could force a sale. Ever. In the third week, I hired a private investigator, a discreet man named Walter Briggs, recommended by Robert. I asked Walter to trace all of Rachel's financial activities for the past 3 years. What he found confirmed everything in the folder and added new layers I hadn't anticipated. Rachel had been lying about her income. She told Dominic she earned $4,500 a month as a boutique manager. The truth, she worked part-time, 3 days a week, at minimum wage. Her actual monthly income was roughly $1,200. But the most devastating discovery was yet to come, and it involved Rachel's own family. Walter Briggs delivered his final report on a Thursday morning in late October, 6 weeks before Rachel would walk into my kitchen and announce her grand Christmas plans. And the first thing out of his mouth changed everything. Mrs. Langford, your daughter-in-law has been telling her family a very different story than the one she's been living. He opened a folder and laid out a timeline. Over the past 3 years, Rachel had systematically lied to the Whitmore family about nearly every aspect of her life. She told them Dominic ran a thriving financial consulting firm. In reality, he was a mid-level analyst at a regional company. She told them I was a wealthy widow sitting on a substantial fortune. In reality, I was a retired teacher living on a pension and savings. She told them my house was worth nearly double its actual market value. But the lie that made my hands go still on the armrests of Robert's leather chair was this. Rachel had told her relatives, specifically her Uncle Gerald and several cousins, that I was planning to make her a beneficiary in my will, that I intended to leave her the house and a significant portion of my estate, and she had used this fiction, my supposed future death and the wealth it would supposedly transfer, as collateral to borrow money from her own family. How much? I asked. Walter glanced at his notes. Based on what I've been able to confirm through financial records and conversations with cooperative family members, approximately $22,400, borrowed from 3 different relatives, all under the premise that your estate would eventually cover the repayment. $22,000, borrowed against my death, against a will that did not exist in any form resembling what Rachel had described. She had turned my mortality into a line of credit. I sat in that office and felt something shift inside me. Not rage this time, but something quieter and more permanent. The last thread of sympathy I had ever felt for Rachel Langford snapped clean through, and I felt nothing but the cold, clear air on the other side of it. There's one more thing, Walter said. Your daughter-in-law contacted Douglas Whitmore, her brother-in-law, approximately 6 months ago, and asked him to prepare a formal property valuation of your home. He completed the assessment and submitted a report to Rachel. She told him you had agreed to sell. I know about the email, I said. But you're telling me Douglas actually did the valuation? He actually went through with it? Yes, ma'am. He spent time and professional resources on it. According to my conversations with him, he was under the impression this was a legitimate family decision. He is not pleased to learn otherwise. So it wasn't just a fantasy. Rachel hadn't merely dreamed about selling my house. She had taken concrete steps to make it happen. She had commissioned professional work based on a lie. The distance between thinking about taking my home and actually taking it had narrowed to almost nothing. Robert leaned forward. Joanna, we need to discuss how you want to handle this. I looked at both men, my lawyer, my investigator, and I said something that surprised all 3 of us. I want to talk to Gerald Whitmore. I composed that first email to Gerald on a Sunday evening in early November, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea and the careful deliberation of a woman writing the most important letter of her life. I did not write an accusation. I did not write a manifesto. I wrote exactly what a concerned 66-year-old mother-in-law would write, because that is exactly what I was. Dear Mr. Whitmore, my name is Joanna Langford. I am the mother-in-law of your niece, Rachel. I hope this message finds you well, and I apologize for reaching out without prior introduction. I am writing because I am genuinely worried about the financial situation of our young couple, and I believe that as older members of this family, we share a responsibility to guide them. I would greatly appreciate your advice on how best to help. I have enclosed some documents that I think you should review before making any financial decisions regarding Rachel and Dominic. With sincere respect, Joanna Langford. Polite, grandmotherly, concerned. And attached to the email were 6 pages of bank statements showing Rachel's secret credit cards, her actual income versus what she had claimed, and the loan amounts she had borrowed from family members under false pretenses. I pressed send and waited. Gerald Whitmore did not respond for 4 days. I later learned why. He had forwarded my email to his niece Patricia, Patty, Rachel's older sister, who worked in banking in New York. Gerald was a successful businessman, but he was also a careful one. He did not take accusations against family at face value, even when they came with documentation. Patty spent 2 weeks conducting her own independent verification. She pulled records, she made calls, she cross-referenced dates and amounts. And when she was finished, she called Gerald and confirmed every single thing I had sent. Gerald's reply arrived on a Tuesday evening in late November, 3 weeks before Christmas. Mrs. Langford, my family has completed our review of the materials you provided. Everything has been verified independently by my niece Patricia, who works in financial services. I will be direct with you. We are deeply disturbed by what we have found. Rachel has deceived this family in ways that go beyond simple financial irresponsibility. She has committed what appears to be fraud against her husband, against you, and against her own relatives. My family will be attending the Christmas gathering Rachel has organized, but I want you to understand, our purpose in coming will be very different from what Rachel expects. We intend to have a frank and thorough conversation with her about her conduct. I would be grateful for the opportunity to meet you in person and to apologize for the part our family has unknowingly played in your mistreatment. With respect, Gerald Whitmore. I read that email 3 times. Then I closed my laptop, walked to the living room, and stood in front of Richard's photograph on the mantel. I think I'm going to be okay, I told him. It was the first time I had said those words in 8 years and meant them. Now you understand why, when Rachel walked into my kitchen on that Tuesday in December and announced her grand Christmas plan, I was ready. Not impulsively ready. Not the kind of ready that comes from anger or spite. I was ready the way a teacher is ready for a final exam she has spent months preparing. Every question anticipated. Every answer documented. Every outcome considered. Rachel thought she was organizing a Christmas celebration. In reality, she was assembling the jury for her own trial. And when I told her I was leaving, when I watched the color drain from her face and the panic flood her eyes, I was not being cruel. I was removing myself from a stage where I had been forced to perform for 5 years and letting the people who needed to see the truth see it without my presence, softening the blow. Because here is something I learned in 40 years of teaching. You cannot force someone to learn. You can only create the conditions where learning becomes unavoidable. And for Rachel, those conditions required her to stand alone, without my cooking, without my labor, without the safety net of the woman she had spent half a decade exploiting, and face the consequences of every lie she had ever told. On the morning I left, a Thursday, 3 days before Christmas, my alarm sang at 6 o'clock, and I got up with an energy I hadn't felt in years. I showered without rushing. I dressed in comfortable clothes, not an apron, not a stained kitchen shirt, but a soft blue sweater and slacks I had bought for myself the week before. A small act of reclamation. I packed my bags calmly. Every garment I folded was another step toward something I had almost forgotten existed, my own life. Before carrying the suitcases downstairs, I made my preparations. I emptied the pantry and the refrigerator completely. Every can, every bag of flour, every stick of butter. If they were going to host 25 people, they needed to learn what it actually took to feed them. I locked my bedroom door, sealing away my good china, my elegant tablecloths, and my Christmas decorations. If Rachel wanted to impress the rich family, she would have to acquire her own supplies. And my final touch? I called and canceled the cleaning service that came twice a week. A service I paid for out of my own pension. A service Rachel had always taken credit for, telling guests how she kept such a tidy house. Starting today, she could experience what that actually meant. I left a note on the kitchen table, next to the spare house keys. I've left early for my trip. The house is in your hands. Merry Christmas. Joanna. At the front door, I stopped. On the wall hung a photograph of Dominic at 5 years old, sitting on Richard's shoulders, both of them grinning into the summer sun. I touched the frame with my fingertips. "I'm not doing this to punish you, sweetheart," I whispered. "I'm doing this because I love you enough to make you grow up." I wiped my eyes, picked up my suitcase, and walked out. The taxi was waiting. My destination was not Miami. It was the Shoreline, a modest but lovely resort exactly 57 minutes from my house, where I had booked a suite with an ocean view for 2 weeks. Linda would be joining me on Christmas Day, because Linda was also alone, her children scattered across the country, and 2 women in their 60s sharing room service and peace seemed like a far better holiday than anything I'd experienced in half a decade. My phone started ringing at 10:47 that morning. Dominic, of course. "Mom, where are you? We found your note. Why did you leave early?" His voice was confused, still groggy. He had probably just discovered the empty pantry and the fact that no one was there to make his weekend breakfast. "Good morning, Dominic. I decided there was no point in prolonging the inevitable. You two have a lot to prepare, and I'm very much looking forward to some rest." "But Mom, this is so sudden." Rachel is, well, she's pretty upset. Upset. What a diplomatic way to describe a woman discovering she would actually have to take charge of her own life. I'm sure she'll manage perfectly, I said. After all, she's a very capable woman. Could you at least tell us where you are, in case of an emergency? I'm safe and in a good place. That's all you need to know. Mom, please. I know you're angry, but this is extreme. Rachel's family arrives in 2 days, and we don't know how to— Dominic, I interrupted firmly. You are 32 years old. Rachel is 29. You are fully functional adults. I am certain you can solve your own problems without relying on a 66-year-old woman. Another pause. This one longer. Fine, he finally sighed. But promise me you'll be okay. I'll be back when I'm ready. Enjoy your Christmas. I hung up before he could insist further and put my phone on silent. I knew the next few hours would be a constant bombardment of desperate calls and messages, but I had waited 5 years for this moment of peace. I wasn't going to let them ruin it. I ordered lobster thermidor from room service, something I would never have cooked for myself, because it would have seemed too extravagant by the standards of austerity Rachel had imposed in my own home while spending thousands on Cartier bracelets. As I ate slowly, savoring every bite on the sunlit terrace, my phone blinked constantly with silenced notifications. That afternoon, I checked the messages. 17 missed calls from Dominic, 31 from Rachel. An avalanche of texts, escalating from confusion to pleading to outrage. But the message I was really waiting for arrived from Gerald at noon. Miss it, Langford, my family and I will arrive tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning as we discussed. I look forward to meeting you personally and having that important conversation with Rachel. I replied, I regret to inform you that I had to move up my departure due to personal commitments. Rachel and Dominic will be delighted to host you. I'm sure you will have much to discuss. His response came in seconds. I understand perfectly. In fact, this might be for the best. Some conversations are better had in private. Private. Exactly what they needed. A private conversation between a woman who had been lying for years and a family that finally knew the truth. That evening I sat on my terrace with a glass of wine and allowed myself to imagine the scene that would unfold the next morning. Rachel and Dominic waking in a panic, making a last-minute run to the grocery store, desperately trying to create the illusion of hospitality. And then, at 8 o'clock sharp, the doorbell announcing the arrival of a family that had not come to celebrate. I sipped my wine and watched the sun disappear into the ocean. For the first time in 5 years, my shoulders didn't ache. The knots that had lived there for half a decade were finally beginning to unravel, one by one, just like Rachel's lies. The morning of December 23rd dawned clear and bright, and my phone exploded with calls. I woke to the first one from Dominic at 6:30. I didn't answer. While I leisurely ate Eggs Benedict with smoked salmon on my terrace, I decided to check the voicemails. The first was from Dominic, his voice thin and frantic. Mom, please pick up. Rachel is completely losing it. We don't know what to make for breakfast for 25 people. The grocery store doesn't open until 8 and the family arrives at exactly that time. We need help. Please call us back. The second was from Rachel. Her voice was unrecognizable. Raw, broken, stripped of every layer of polish and performance. Joanna, I know you're angry at me and I understand why, but please don't humiliate me in front of my family. They flew thousands of miles. Uncle Gerald came from Miami. Patty canceled important meetings in New York. I don't even know how to cook for this many people. I don't know where to start. I promise we'll talk after and fix everything. But right now, I desperately need your help. The third was Rachel again, now openly sobbing. Joanna, I just checked the pantry and the refrigerator. Everything is empty. There is nothing. How am I supposed to feed my family? Where is the good china? Where are the Christmas tablecloths? At least tell me where you put everything. Just that. Please. I listened to these messages sitting in the morning sun, and I want to be honest with you about what I felt. Because this is not a story about a woman who felt only triumph. This is a story about a woman who felt everything. I felt satisfaction. Yes, the grim, weary satisfaction of a person who has been proven right after years of being told she was wrong. But I also felt sadness. A deep, aching sadness that it had come to this. That the woman my son married could not make breakfast for her own family. that my son could not solve a logistical problem without calling his 66-year-old mother at dawn, that the relationships in my family had deteriorated so thoroughly that my absence created not just inconvenience, but complete collapse. That is not victory. That is grief with a different face. At 7:15, the message I had been waiting for arrived. A text from Gerald Whitmore. Mrs. Langford, my family arrived at the airport early. We are heading directly to your house. We expect to arrive by 8 o'clock. I understand you have already departed. That may be for the best. Some conversations are better had in private. I replied, I understand completely. I trust your judgment, Gerald. Please know that despite everything, I love my son, and I want what is best for this family, even when what is best is painful. His response came in seconds. That is exactly why my family respects you, Mrs. Langford. We will handle this with the seriousness it deserves. I set my phone down and looked out at the water. Somewhere 57 minutes north, Gerald Whitmore and his family were driving toward a house with no food, no decorations, and no grandmother in the kitchen. They were driving toward a daughter-in-law who had built her entire identity on lies, and a son-in-law who had never once questioned why life was so comfortable. At 8:20, my phone rang. Dominic, I answered. Mom, his voice was trembling in a way I hadn't heard since he was 11 years old and called me from summer camp because the other boys had hidden his shoes. Rachel's family just arrived, and Mom, something is wrong. Uncle Gerald isn't smiling. He asked to speak with Rachel privately. Patty has a folder full of papers. Douglas looks furious. Mom, what is happening? I closed my eyes. This was the moment I had anticipated for 3 months. The moment when the walls Rachel had built would begin to crack, not from the outside, but from within. What's happening, Dominic, is the truth. What truth? Mom, what did you do? I didn't do anything, sweetheart. I simply stopped hiding what Rachel has been doing. The rest is between her and the people she lied to. Mom, Dominic, listen to me. I love you. I have loved you since the moment the nurse placed you in my arms 32 years ago. Everything I have done, including leaving this house, I have done because I love you. But love does not mean silence, and it does not mean standing by while someone dismantles everything your father and I built. There was a long pause. I could hear voices in the background. Gerald's deep baritone, firm and measured. Rachel's higher pitch, already cracking. Mom, I'm scared, Dominic whispered. And there it was, my son, underneath the wrinkled suit and the corporate jargon and 5 years of willful blindness. My son, scared and confused and finally unable to look away. I know, baby, I said softly, but sometimes being scared is how you know you're about to see something important. Stay in that room. Listen to what Gerald has to say. And when it's over, call me. I hung up. Then I ordered a second cup of coffee, and I waited for the world to rearrange itself. The call came at 11:47 that morning. Not from Dominic. From Patty. Mrs. Langford. Her voice was steady but heavy, the voice of a woman who had just performed surgery on her own family. It's done. Tell me. Gerald confronted Rachel with everything. The secret credit cards, all 4 of them. The fabricated income. The loans she took for family using your supposed inheritance as collateral. The property valuation she had Douglas prepare on your home without your knowledge or consent. He laid every document on the kitchen table, one by one, and asked her to explain. How did Douglas take it? I asked. He's livid. He spent real time and professional resources on that valuation based on Rachel's lie that you had agreed to sell. He feels completely used. He told Rachel to her face that what she did was a betrayal of professional trust. And the rest? At first, she denied everything. Then she said it was a misunderstanding. Then she tried to blame you. Said you were a bitter old woman who was jealous of her relationship with Dominic. Patty paused. That didn't go well. Gerald told her that the bitter old woman was the only person in this family who had told the truth in 5 years. I closed my eyes. And then something happened that none of us expected, Patty continued. Rachel broke, not her usual performance crying, really broke. She sat on the kitchen floor and told us she'd been terrified since the day she married Dominic. Terrified that our family would find out she wasn't successful, wasn't important, wasn't enough. She said every lie started as a small exaggeration and grew until she couldn't find her way back to the truth. I was quiet for a long time. Because I am 66 years old, and I have learned that people are never just one thing. Rachel was manipulative, yes. She was selfish and deceptive, and she had treated me like furniture for 5 years. But she was also a 29-year-old woman drowning in a fiction she had built because she believed the truth about herself wasn't worth loving. That does not excuse what she did, but it explains it. And at my age, understanding matters more than anger. "How is Dominic?" I asked. Patty's voice softened. "Devastated. He went through it all right there in the living room. First he said there must be a mistake, that Rachel wouldn't do this. Then he opened his banking app on his phone and saw the accounts he didn't know existed. His hands were shaking. Then he got angry, really angry, and asked Rachel how long she'd been lying. And then he just sat down, went quiet, put his head in his hands and didn't speak for a long time. And then?" I asked, my chest tight. Then he said, very quietly, "And Mom knew, and she still cooked for us. She still cleaned for us, while we—" He couldn't finish the sentence. I pressed my hand against my mouth and breathed through it. "He's sitting on the porch alone now," Patty said. "I think he's processing everything. Not just Rachel's lies, but his own part in it. The way he let you carry the weight all these years." "Don't be too hard on him," I said, surprising myself. "He's going to need time." "Miss Langford, Joanna, when are you coming home?" "Tomorrow morning, Christmas Eve. I have one more thing to take care of." I arrived at 4217 Coral Ridge Drive at 10 o'clock on the morning of December 24th. Robert Caldwell pulled up behind my taxi exactly on schedule, briefcase in hand. Linda was in the back seat of my taxi. I had asked her to come with me, because there are moments in life when you need your best friend standing beside you, and this was one of them. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in years. Not empty quiet, full quiet. The kind of silence that follows a storm, when the air is clean and everything that was loose has been stripped away. Dominic met me at the door. He looked like he had aged 5 years overnight. His eyes were red. His shirt was wrinkled, but he was standing up straight, and when he saw me, his face did something I hadn't seen in a very long time. It crumpled. "Mom," he said, just that one word, and then he was holding me, this 32-year-old man who was taller than me by 6 inches, shaking in my arms the way he used to shake during thunderstorms when he was 4. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I knew. Some part of me always knew, and I didn't want to see it. It was easier to let you carry everything, and I hate myself for that." I held my son and I let him cry, because this was not about punishment. This was never about punishment. This was about truth, and truth, when it finally arrives, always hurts before it heals. "I forgive you," I said, and I meant it. "But things are going to be different now." "I know," he said. "They have to be." "Why didn't you tell me from the start?" he asked, pulling back, his eyes searching mine. "About the documents, about all of it." I looked at him, my boy, the child who once sat on his father's shoulders laughing at the sky, and I told him the truth. "Because I was afraid of losing you. I was afraid that if I made you choose between your wife and your mother, you'd choose her. And for 5 years, I decided that being invisible near you was better than being honest and alone." I paused, and my voice trembled just slightly. But then I realized that being close to someone while losing yourself isn't closeness at all. It's just loneliness with extra noise. Dominic's face broke open completely then. He pulled me in again and held on like a man who had just realized how close he'd come to losing something he could never replace. In the living room, Gerald and Patty sat on one side, their faces solemn. Douglas sat beside them, his jaw tight, a man who had invested professional time in evaluation based entirely on Rachel's lies. Evelyn and her husband were on the love seat. Aunt Vivian sat in the armchair by the window. Rachel sat alone in the corner of the sofa. No makeup, no performance, no armor. Her eyes were swollen. Her hands were clasped in her lap so tightly her knuckles were white. Robert set his briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with the practiced calm of a man who had spent 40 years making complicated things legally precise. "Good morning," he said. "I am Robert Caldwell, Mrs. Langford's attorney. I understand there are some family and financial matters that require formal clarification." Rachel flinched at the word attorney. Dominic stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder, a gesture that, for the first time in 5 years, felt like support rather than condescension. First, Robert said, the changes to Mrs. Langford's estate plan. The property at 4217 Coral Ridge Drive has been transferred into the Langford Family Preservation Trust. Under the terms of this trust, the house cannot be sold, mortgaged, or used as collateral without Mrs. Langford's explicit written consent during her lifetime and after her death. Dominic's inheritance rights are fully protected, but any form of financial speculation on the property is permanently prohibited. He paused to let the words settle. Second, the new terms of access. Rachel Langford no longer has unrestricted access rights to this property. Any visit must be coordinated in advance and approved by Mrs. Langford. What does that mean? Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I answered her directly. It means you don't get to walk into my house whenever you please and order me to cook and clean for your guests. This is my home, not a restaurant, not a hotel, not a stage for you to perform on. Rachel looked at me, and for the first time since I had known her, there was no calculation behind her eyes, just exhaustion and something that might have been the beginning of shame. And regarding the new apartment you two put a deposit on, Robert continued, glancing at his notes, I strongly advise that no further financial commitments be made until the existing debts, including the $53,817 in unauthorized credit card debt, are fully addressed through a structured repayment plan. Dominic inhaled sharply. He had seen the numbers the day before, but hearing them spoken aloud in a room full of people made them real in a different way. Gerald stood then. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with the kind of quiet authority that comes not from shouting, but from being the person everyone else in the room falls silent for. Rachel, he said, and his voice carried the weight of a man who had built a business from nothing and understood exactly what dishonesty costs. Our family gave you opportunities, trust, financial support, all of it based on lies you told us, about your income, about your marriage, about this woman. He gestured toward me. You made us unwitting accomplices in disrespecting someone who deserved our admiration, not our contempt. Rachel's lips trembled. Uncle Gerald, I never wanted... You never wanted what? To lie about your income? To commit identity fraud against your own husband? To tell your cousins that Joanna's inheritance would cover loans you had no intention of repaying? To have Douglas spend weeks preparing a property valuation based on a fabrication? Douglas spoke then, his voice clipped and tight. I put my professional reputation behind that assessment, Rachel. You told me Joanna had agreed. You looked me in the eye and lied. Rachel had no answer. Every dollar borrowed from this family will be repaid, Gerald continued, immediately. The financial support we had discussed for Dominic's career is withdrawn, and you will personally apologize to every person in this family you deceived. Every single one. The room was silent. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a neighbor's Christmas music drifting through the walls. Then I spoke, not to Gerald, not to Patty or Douglas, to Rachel. There's one more thing, I said. If you want to remain in this family, and that is your choice, not mine, you will get professional help, a financial counselor, a therapist. Not because you are broken, but because you have been living a lie for so long that you've forgotten what the truth feels like. I paused. I know something about that. I spent 5 years lying to myself about what was happening in this house. So I'm not standing here pretending I'm above you. I'm standing here telling you that lies, even the ones we tell to survive, will eat you alive if you don't stop feeding them. Rachel looked up at me. Her eyes were red and wet, and for the first time in 5 years, completely unguarded. Why? She whispered. After everything I did to you, why would you give me a chance? Because someone gave me one once, I said. 40 years ago, I was a 26-year-old woman who had no idea what she was doing in a classroom, and an older teacher took me under her wing and showed me that asking for help is not the same as being weak. I looked at her steadily. I'm not that teacher, but I remember what she did for me, and I remember that people can change, if they decide to. Rachel didn't speak. She just nodded, a small, broken nod that contained more honesty than anything she had said in the 5 years I had known her. That evening, we ordered pizza for 25 people. We ate on paper plates because my good china was still locked in my bedroom, and I wasn't ready to bring it out yet. There were no 3-tiered chocolate cakes, no tablecloths or centerpieces or elaborate decorations, no Instagram photos of a perfect Christmas that never existed. Gerald sat to my left and told me about his garden in Miami. Bougainvillea that bloomed 3 times a year, he said, and a mango tree that produced more fruit than he could give away. Linda sat to my right, squeezing my hand under the table the way she had been doing at every important moment of my life for the past 30 years. Across the room, Evelyn was helping her children open presents she'd packed in her suitcase. Douglas and Patty were talking quietly near the window, their earlier anger settling into something more measured. Dominic sat across from me, and every few minutes our eyes would meet. In his gaze, I saw something new. Not the boy who looked away, not the man who chose comfort over truth. Something emerging, still fragile, still uncertain, but pointed in the right direction. A man learning to see clearly, even when it hurt. Rachel sat quietly at the end of the table. She didn't speak much. But at one point, without being asked, without being expected to, without anyone watching, she stood up, gathered several empty plates and napkins, and carried them to the kitchen. It was a small thing, such a small thing. But small things are where rebuilding starts. Linda noticed too. She leaned over and whispered in my ear, "Look at that. She's clearing a table for the first time in her life." I almost laughed. Almost. Later that night, after the pizza boxes were stacked by the door and the relatives had scattered to various guest rooms and hotels and the house had finally gone quiet, I stepped out onto the back porch with my tea. Richard's roses were dormant for the winter, bare stems reaching toward the dark sky, patient and leafless and waiting. They looked dead to anyone who didn't know better. But I knew their roots were deep, and I knew what they would become when the warmth returned. I stood there in the December chill and I thought about what the past 5 years had cost me. The dignity, the time, the back pain, the loneliness of being surrounded by people who didn't see me. I thought about what the past 3 months had given me. The clarity, the courage, the bone-deep understanding that silence is not peace, that obedience is not love, and that the most dangerous lie is the one you tell yourself to avoid being alone. But mostly I thought about this. I am 66 years old. I have buried a husband. I have raised a son. I have survived a daughter-in-law who treated me like I was invisible. I have made mistakes, years of them, and I have finally stopped making the one that mattered most. I stopped disappearing. Not who my family needed me to be, not who my grief turned me into. Not the ghost in the dark window washing someone else's dishes, but me, the woman I was before I forgot. The woman who could silence a room full of teenagers with a look. The woman who paid off a 30-year mortgage with chalk dust hands. The woman who held her husband's hand until the very end and then somehow kept going. That woman was still here. She had been here all along, waiting beneath the apron and the silence and the fear, the way roots wait beneath the winter soil. The roses will bloom again in April. They always do. And so, my darlings, will we.